Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give everyone a couple of seconds to continue filing in here. So just bear with us for a moment. Okay, so we seem to have leveled off in terms of number of people joining us. So thank you all for being here today. My name is Rachel Becker. I'm Deputy Director of Cancer and Careers, and I will be your host for today's webinar. For those of you who may not be familiar with CAC, we are a national nonprofit and the only program of its kind solely dedicated to empowering and educating people with cancer to thrive in their work environment. All of the programs and services we offer are provided free of charge. Our comprehensive website is available in both English and Spanish and is at the heart of everything we do. There, you can find various support services, including our resume review service and access to career coaches. We also offer a collective diary as a place to share feelings, thoughts, and ideas that may help inspire and validate other visitors to our site. Our educational blog and news feed are both rich resources where those who have been diagnosed, their caregivers, employers, and healthcare professionals can stay current on topics related to work and cancer. Additionally, our publication library provides tangible, easy to digest information on working and looking for work after a cancer diagnosis. Titles are available in both English and Spanish, and they can be ordered or downloaded from our website. Again, they are all free of charge. We also offer a number of free events throughout the year, both hour-long webinars like this one, as well as full-day programs. And I will be back at the end of today's program to tell you more about those. But there's a whole host of other things that we offer at Cancer and Careers, and you can check those out by visiting our website, cancerandcareers.org. So before we begin, a few housekeeping items related to accreditation. And for those of you who don't require this information, bear with me. I promise I will be as quick as possible. Today's webinar is accredited by the American Nurses Credentialing Center, the Association of Social Work Boards, the New York State Education Department State Board for Social Work, the California Board of Registered Nursing, and by the Society of Human Resource Management for PDCs. If you plan on requesting continuing education credit or PDCs for this program from any of these accrediting bodies, please proceed with the following steps. First, you must log in individually. Participants who listen in on someone else's line will not receive credit. Second, you must complete and submit the evaluation and post-test, as well as receive a passing grade of 80% or higher on the post-test. You will receive an email with all of this information after the session. It will be sent no later than 5 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, April 20th, and then certificates will be emailed within 4 weeks. Also, please note that the planners and presenters for this program have not disclosed any pertinent financial relationships or conflicts of interest, and that no commercial support was provided for this program. Thanks in part to direct support from Genentech and QVC, Cancer and Careers is able to offer this 9th year of the Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series. This program was created to provide patients and survivors, as well as their care teams and employers, with concise, targeted information about all the work-related issues that arise after a cancer diagnosis. Additionally, we'd like to recognize Cancer and Careers year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and allow us to continue providing all resources and services free of charge. Now on to our topic for today. One of the silver linings that has emerged from the complexity of the COVID-19 pandemic has been the increased availability and understanding of remote work. What was once dismissed by many as a less efficient way of working has now been widely adopted by employers of all sizes and industries across the globe. The shift has been especially beneficial to people navigating work after a cancer diagnosis who are seeking greater flexibility in their schedules, or hoping to eliminate a taxing commute, or reaching to embrace any of the other benefits that working from home may provide. Of course, working remotely may also come with some challenges, which we will walk you through today. And we will also discuss some potential solutions for managing them. Leading today's webinar is Scott Sinclair, Senior Manager of Programs here at Cancer and Careers. Following Scott's presentation, there will be time for a Q&A, so feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. Tatiana and I will be monitoring the chat box. Tatiana is behind the scenes while Scott is presenting. But if there are any questions that you would like answered during the Q&A at the end of the session, please submit them in the Q&A box. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Scott.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone. So before we jump in, here's just a little overview of what today's discussion will include. Like Rachel said, we'll have time at the end for further questions, so please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we can address anything unanswered during the session. Today, we'll discuss current attitudes towards remote work, the challenges of working a hybrid or remote schedule, and strategies for addressing them, strategies for negotiating beginning to or continuing to work from home, as well as tips for looking for a new position with remote work. Now, given how the last 3 years have played out, it might make sense to ask whether this new remote work setup will be considered the new normal. Even prior to the pandemic, remote work was becoming much more acceptable and commonplace over the last decade. A few important notes to make in the realm of how remote work relates to those with cancer. Prior to the pandemic, those with disabilities, which does include those with a cancer diagnosis, were 20% more likely to work from home than similar workers without a disability. This may be due to informal work agreements and arrangements or a more formalized plan that were considered reasonable accommodations. Either way, remote work for people with cancer is not a new concept, but is one that can be really useful. McKinsey conducted a survey of workers after 2 years in the pandemic, and of those responded, nearly 60% reported that they work from home at least 1 day a week. This would indicate that those who work remotely full-time and those who may have a hybrid schedule. Finally, there's an indication that flexible work, which includes remote work and hybrid schedules, has grown almost tenfold in the last 4 years. That's really significant, and again, suggests that this is not some temporary phase. Now, I just want to take a quick temperature check before we get going. In a minute, Tatiana's going to launch a poll to see how many of you are working from home. So if you want to respond to that, and just a bit of background while we're getting some answers in here, CAC has been a fully remote organization since 2020. We used to have a physical office, but we've been working at home since the pandemic hit. I personally love the short commute from one side of my apartment to the other side of my apartment. It makes the mornings much easier. But there's definitely ups and downs, and it takes a lot of communication between all of us here to make things running well. So it looks like we have a pretty solid mix of people here. If we want to share the results, there we go. So a good chunk of you are working full-time from home. A few of you are part-time. A lot of you are in a hybrid schedule. Fully in person, not working at all. All of these are great, and we'll hit all of those buckets moving on. So while anyone can cite some reasons for why working from home may be beneficial or preferable, the benefits to remote work for those with a cancer diagnosis are plentiful. It can eliminate those long and often pricey commutes. That means more energy that would normally be expelled on getting to and from work that can be saved and put towards actually working. You can also get hours of your day back, which means more sleep or more time for exercise, or time to just make yourself meals instead of grabbing something quick on the way to the office. Time is so valuable, and the ability to have more of it can make a huge difference in the day. As we all know, cancer and treatment can severely impact one's immune system. So if you're someone who takes public transportation to work, a remote job can avoid some of that exposure to germs on your commute. The ability to home also means avoiding cold season in the office, where you can't always rely on coworkers to stay home if they're sick, or could be bringing germs into the office from a sick kid at home. Being able to isolate in a safe environment can be critical for those with a compromised immune system. And of course, a common side effect of treatment is chemo brain, which is also called brain fog. And having your own space without coworkers around and not working in an open floor plan office can mean greater ability to focus and be productive, as well as have more control over interruptions and distractions. Finally, a remote work setup can also mean that there's more flexibility in your schedule to attend doctor appointments and treatments. Many appointments can be attended virtually, which saves time and energy, and can be done from the privacy of your home without the concern of coworkers or your employer hearing. And if you need to attend treatment that's hours long, you could bring your computer and work from the chemo chair if, of course, you feel up to it. That means not needing to take time away from work and limited distractions in your workday or your work week. And of course, this may not work for everyone, but it can take some pressure and stress if you are in active treatment and need to complete a project or meet certain deadlines. Of course, working from home may not be for everyone. Some people enjoy the social aspects of the office. That's definitely something that I miss a lot since we've been working remotely. Some people might focus better outside of their homes, but the data really shows that the majority of employees would prefer the option to work remotely. This was not limited to a specific demographic, occupation, or geography. But given what we saw during the pandemic, where many jobs that had never been remote turned out to function pretty well in a remote capacity, opened the door for future positions being remote. From that study that I cited earlier, as of spring 2022, 35% of job holders stated that they can work from home full-time, with 23% saying that they could work from home part-time. Advances in technology and software have enabled so many jobs to function remotely, and thus, if the option is there, people would like to take it. It's no secret that the pandemic has influenced many attitudes around work and what job seekers value and are prioritizing. For those who are actively job seeking now, many of you have stated that the ability to decide where and when you work is a major factor in what you're applying to. The digital nomad lifestyle has also become popular. Flexibilities in schedules to care for kids and family members is being prioritized. And overall, a greater control over one's time and energy is being recognized as a major factor when considering new jobs. So we've established that the work landscape has changed over the past decade or so, but still not every industry or organization has been able to transition completely to full-time virtual jobs for its staff, nor do they plan to. As a result, many people who were asked to work from home temporarily have probably been asked to return to the office at least part-time. However, if you feel strongly that you want to continue to work remotely, discuss it with your boss. It's possible that they'll be willing to make an exception in your case or offer a hybrid arrangement where you can work from home part-time and be in the office for part of the time. There's another aspect that employees are grappling with, and that's the attitude that the pandemic is over. Of course, that there have been safety improvements, higher rates of vaccination, etc. But for those with compromised immune systems, it can feel like your needs and concerns are not necessarily being considered in some of these decisions influenced by this attitude. So with all of that said, if you're dealing with an employer who feels this way, it's important for you to consider what your safety needs are, what the recommendation of your healthcare providers are, and finally, what types of options or setups would then make you feel comfortable and properly protected. Now that we've discussed the many benefits of remote work, it's worth pointing out specific challenges. Physical aspects of a functional workspace can be challenging to get right. Many have reported feeling isolated and lonely working from home all day. Despite many of us having social interactions online, it can still be hard to get the communication right and be able to effectively express ourselves via email, text, or even phone video calls. Setting boundaries in life and work can be difficult in general, but ensuring a balance between your work and personal life can be especially challenging when working from home, where the lines sometimes become a bit blurrier. And finally, when it comes to a cancer diagnosis, there's certain disclosure and privacy considerations that need extra careful attention when working in an online work setup. I'll be diving into all of these aspects over the next couple of slides, so we're better able to articulate the challenges, as well as identify some solutions that can be used to alleviate or eliminate those obstacles. As I mentioned, the actual physical workspace can pose a challenge when starting to work remotely. Space and privacy can be limited, especially in a home office where it was not a major consideration when choosing your home or your apartment, and therefore options for an actual desk can feel non-existent. I'm currently sitting at my dining room table here in New York City, which is part of my living room, which it's all cramped quarters here, but we make it work. So identifying a specific workspace, even if it's not an actual desk, can make all the difference in creating a balance between work and personal time. The balance is tricky, but having a physical separation can help communicate to your brain when it's time to work and when it's not. The way you set up your desk can help you stay focused while you work, which can be particularly helpful for patients and survivors experiencing chemo brain. Decluttering your workspace helps to minimize distractions, and organizing your files can help stay on task. For instance, make sure that your mail with your medical bills and your utility bills aren't getting mixed in with your work documents, which can make the difference between making payments on time and getting late charges. Having folders, baskets, etc., can help a more organized setup and prevent any mishaps with your personal files getting mixed in with your work files. Similarly, making sure that supplies and equipment are easily accessible can eliminate undue exhaustion if you're experiencing fatigue. Also, you want to be sure that your setup isn't merely comfortable in the moment, but also supports your physical health in the long run. This can be especially important if you don't have a desk and instead are sitting in bed or on the couch with your laptop. And breaks are so important to focus. It may seem counterintuitive that taking a break away from work will help with flow, but everyone needs to give their brain a break from time to time. And nowhere is that more true than those balancing a cancer diagnosis with work. Getting up to stretch regularly, taking midday walks, all of this can be helpful. Even just getting up and looking out the window for a minute or two can clear your mind and can really help with focus and productivity. As I mentioned, not everyone's able to have a designated work-only space, so how you can figure out a way to make that physical separation. If you work at the dining room table, like I am, maybe you make a point to clear the table off every evening and put your computer in a cabinet so that you can eat dinner in that space and not look at anything work-related. Comfort is also so important to having an effective and practical workspace. Being comfortable can remove distraction of pain. Is working from the couch better for your physical comfort? How does that look for you? For instance, if your joints are very sensitive from treatment, sitting on the couch or working from bed may make your body feel more at ease and increase your ability to focus at work. Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act can also come into play when setting up a home office. Perhaps there's a specific equipment or software that would make you do your job easier. It's worth exploring whether if reasonable accommodations are available to you through your work before making any purchases on your own dime. There are a number of great resources for learning more about the ADA and reasonable accommodations. The Job Accommodation Network has templates that you can use to make a formal request to your employers, as well as ideas for accommodations based on symptoms. Finally, we have an article on our website that provides an overview of the process and some additional ideas and approaches. And I think we're going to have Tatiana share that link in the chat if you want to take a look. We also, you should have gotten a copy of this deck in your email today, so you can click through all the links later on if you'd rather do that. Now, it might initially seem easy enough to set up your home office, but when thinking about what will be the most comfortable day in and day out, it can be helpful to have some guidance. The Rising Workplace is a website and organization focused on providing in-depth information on creating an ergonomically friendly workspace, both in an office and at home. Early on in the pandemic, they released a free 20-minute video, which is linked on this slide, on ergonomics and working from home, for guidance on creating a more comfortable workspace by using an ergonomic approach. We also have a blog post discussing tips for working remotely, which is also linked on this slide, and I believe will be shared in the chat in a moment. For many, workplace interactions account for a majority of weekday socialization. Many people live alone, and not having friendly small talk or conversations in the break room can mean a lot less socialization throughout the days, which can certainly lead to feelings of loneliness and isolation. Luckily, there are some ways that you can combat those feelings. Having regular check-ins with your coworkers is a great way to stay on top of workload and responsibilities, but it also serves as a way to sustain friendly relationships with coworkers as well. Of course, it depends on your workplace culture and relationships, but if it's appropriate, try scheduling 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of meetings for people to socialize and catch up, which can make people feel more connected and add a little bit more of that casual feel to interactions with coworkers, which ultimately means more meaningful connections. We do that here. We have a weekly check-in every Thursday morning, and we try to spend 10 minutes. Sometimes it's about 20 minutes if it's a particularly good TV episode the night before, but it really adds that water cooler sense in the virtual world, which is great. You can also do virtual events and team building opportunities. They can look and feel a little different from in-person events, but they're just as important. From a virtual pizza party or coffee to online group games, the possibilities are endless. It just requires a little creativity. And just like the check-ins, a virtual team building activity can help bring coworkers together and remind one another that they're part of the larger team and each one of them plays a part. Of course, a lot of people were zoomed out from all the social activities going on during the pandemic. I know I was at a point. So it's important to be mindful of what people actually want to do and making things optional when possible. You can always take a poll or a survey of what people might be interested in, which can also mean more successful, enjoyable, and most importantly, well-attended events. As I mentioned earlier, working from home can also make it difficult to separate work and personal life. So making sure that life exists outside of work is very important too. Engaging in activities outside of work can help add more of the human interaction that working remotely can lack. Signing up for an exercise class or finding a new craft hobby. You can meet a friend for work, meet a friend after work for a walk, or join a book club. All of these small actions can lead to feeling more social and engaged. And you also want to make sure that you set time for yourself specifically that doesn't have to do with any type of responsibility. So maybe that's take yourself out to lunch or meditate or listen to a podcast. Anything that allows you to give yourself a small break and do something that you enjoy. Self-care can go a long way in terms of keeping a clear and happy mind and increase the quality of your life. And just a quick shout out, we do have a webinar coming up on self-care on July 12th. We'll be joined by oncology social worker Wade Iwata, who will go into all of this so much more in depth, and it's going to be a great presentation. I hope you can join us for that. Some aspects of communication when working remotely can be more challenging than when everybody was in the same location. Awkward silences, unsteady Wi-Fi connections, the lack of social cues that occur naturally in person can often lead to misunderstandings or talking over one another, and overall ineffective communication. So without the ability to have natural interactions with your employer in an office setting, communication needs to be more intentional when working remotely. As I mentioned before, in terms of the benefits of socialization and staying connected on a personal level, regularly scheduled check-ins are very important for staying on task, ensuring that everyone's expectations are being met, and that there's no gaps in understanding of how things are going. Standing meetings with your supervisor can be useful for exploring what's working well and where improvements may be needed, so that there's no misunderstanding, no resentment brewing, and everyone feels good about the setup. There can also be different standards of communication between an in-person workplace and an all-virtual workplace that might require extra effort, new skills, and some getting used to. There can be new challenges that present themselves when you may be working remotely while everyone else is in the physical office. So allowing a bit of room and time to get it right can be a good idea. Having open and honest conversations can also mean that there's no misunderstanding of what the expectations are. This can mean a more formalized plan for setting hours and schedules, and making sure that everyone's on the same page of how to update your team and your supervisor on the status of your projects. And of course, having a copy of your employee handbook on hand can provide valuable information quickly. If there's a formal policy around remote work, being able to refer back to that so that you can be confident you understand what is expected of you as a remote worker. If there's no handbook or set policy, have the conversation with your employer to make sure that there's a mutual understanding of what should and should not be done. Finally, as I said earlier, if working remotely is a reasonable accommodation for you and your coworkers are in the office, make sure you figure out what the best way is for you to stay in the loop, since you might not be a part of certain conversations that happen organically when people are in a shared office, such as running into each other in the hallway or popping into a conference room for a quick unscheduled discussion. Again, having regular formal check-ins can be a great way to make sure you don't miss out on important information in those informal conversations in the office. And just as important as communicating effectively is the ability to set boundaries. I think everyone can agree that boundaries are an important aspect of life, and work is no different. Making sure that you draw clear lines at work can not only help you become more productive and in control, but it can empower you and make you feel more confident personally as well as professionally. This graphic illustrates the cycle that many of us can get caught in if we do not set and, more importantly, stick with boundaries. By setting reasonable parameters ahead of time regarding expectations for workload or hours worked each day and so on, you can avoid unrealistic expectations and prevent people from taking advantage of you while making sure that you are prioritizing yourself as well as your health. And if the idea of identifying and articulating specific boundaries in the context of your job feels uncomfortable to you, know that you are not alone. This can be especially true for people who identify as people pleasers and have trouble saying no. I definitely see that in myself, and it can be so hard. But recognizing areas where you need to establish what your specific limits are is really important to help you ensure that you don't wind up burning out. For some people, they're going to be time related, such as adhering to a previously set schedule or saying no to an extra project that they don't have the bandwidth for. Or they may be related to your comfort, such as being able to keep your camera off on a day where you're feeling more low energy, or maybe taking more frequent breaks throughout the day. All are extremely important for maintaining control over your work-life balance. Now, the specific challenges faced may vary between different people who are working from home. For some people, one of the challenges of working remotely is that they end up putting in more hours than they would on site. Sometimes people who don't have to commute wind up sitting down at their desks earlier and working later than they would if they had to leave the office to catch a train home, for example. Also, because there's often no real physical separation between home and work, the official end of the workday becomes fuzzy. The key to setting effective boundaries in the workplace is crafting language that feels natural and communicates the no message in a way that's still professional and team-oriented. On this slide, you'll see a few specific professional no's that can be used as you like. You can either use the same language exactly as written, if it works in your circumstance, or it can be adapted to sound more like you and your specific situation. And if you're working from home with roommates or family who are in the same space as you, it's important to communicate clearly with everybody what your needs are. This could mean giving them a heads up when you're about to join a meeting where you need focus and quiet, or maybe set up a system for your kids so that they know when it's okay to interrupt and when it's not. If you find that there are too many audio or visual distractions, you might want to consider noise-canceling headphones or maybe a room divider. Even if you're able to create a work area that suits your needs perfectly, it's still important to leave it occasionally. Physically removing yourself from the space in which you work, both during and at the end of the workday, is critical. If you're able to take a break, whether that means meditating, stretching, flipping through a magazine, or taking a brief walk, be sure to do it somewhere else. Immersing yourself in a different physical location is as important as giving your brain a rest. Both are key to maintaining psychological well-being on the job as well as in life. And while you may no longer work in an office full-time with people every day, you'll still want to be mindful of your choices regarding disclosure and privacy. Be careful not to develop a false sense of security just because you're working in a more personal, private space. In some ways, you need to be even more hyper-aware. For example, if you're working from home and you have video meetings, your coworkers, clients, whomever you're meeting with, will be able to view your personal space. So make sure that there's nothing visible in the background that you're not comfortable sharing. Or you can choose to use a virtual or blurred background. You can see that I am using one today. We use them all the time here. It does help kind of minimize any background distractions for you. And if you're sharing your screen during meetings, be aware of any desktop files, pop-up notifications, etc., that might be visible. It can be a good idea to pause those before the meeting starts. If you check your personal email or log into a personal account on your work device, we recommend that you sign out at the end of every day and set up two-factor authentication to ensure that you're notified if anyone other than you tries to sign in. It's also important to remember that every organization handles its cybersecurity and tracking of employee activity differently. And even if you think you have a good idea of your company culture, you may not know the full extent of your organization's oversight. On the extreme end of the spectrum, some companies use programs that can record every activity that happens on your computer that they give you. Those include keystrokes, taking screenshots of your computer desktop, or accessing your camera and microphone. And while a company's reason for using these programs may be to track productivity in a very well-intended way, they can expose information that you'd rather keep private. It's also very easy for your company's network administrator to monitor your internet activity. Even if you're browsing in an incognito mode, that setting makes it so that the web browser doesn't track your data, but it doesn't affect what your employer is able to do. So think twice before Googling your diagnosis, treatment, side effects, or doctors on a company computer, if those are things that you want to keep private. Many companies also use a chat application. Slack or Microsoft Teams are probably the two most popular. And it's key to know that because your employer owns that program or the license for it, there's always a chance that even your private messages to a coworker that you trust could be reviewed by a supervisor or HR. And the same guidance mentioned in screen sharing applies here. A coworker whom you trust and have discussed your diagnosis with could just as easily accidentally leave their chat window open while sharing a screen during a meeting. Also keep in mind, if your company shares its primary login for their video conferencing platforms, such as Zoom, remember to switch to your own personal account before having a private telehealth appointment. And even then, check to make sure that the program is not set to auto-record. As with any disclosure decisions, the point of all of this above is to think ahead and make informed choices so that nothing gets accidentally shared. And again, we're not trying to make you paranoid, but we do want to arm you with relevant information so that you can consider all of the angles. If your office has returned to be in person, but you still want to work remote, how do you approach this conversation with your employer? In the early days of the pandemic, traditionally in-person roles were switched to being remote, and many found that this was a positive change. However, it's important to understand that just because there were benefits to working remotely for both the employee and the employer, continuing to work from home is not necessarily a given. Being aware of existing policies at work can be helpful in your ask. If a remote work policy is mentioned in your handbook, understand what the parameters of that policy are and how they can be applied to your circumstance. If remote work was always viewed in a negative light, perhaps coming to a compromise on a hybrid schedule would be more realistic. Overall, you want to present a proposal that considers the needs of all involved. Think through how you would ensure that the needs of the company are being met as well as your needs. This may mean being on call at different hours than normal to meet the needs of responsibilities for the role. Also consider if and how your remote role may affect your coworkers that may still be in the office. Since you're making a formal request, you want to approach it in a professional way. This means bringing a realistic plan to the table that can address any concerns that your employer may have regarding working remotely. Those concerns may include, how can you be contacted? How will you continue supervising anyone who reports to you? How will you participate in team meetings and projects? What will your working hours be? And what, if any, days and times will you be on site? As we discussed earlier, open communication is important, so noting your intention of regular check-ins with your supervisor can serve as an effective way to stay accountable and make your employer more comfortable with the idea. You also want to be organized around your ask. Create a plan conducive to your employer's needs and recognize any challenges that may exist while proactively suggesting solutions. Though some employers may not view remote work as ideal, it doesn't mean that their minds can't be changed when the information is presented with a solid and practical proposal. Finally, it can be worth looking into whether the ADA or other state and local fair employment laws may provide assistance and potential for working remotely. Citing these can be helpful as you make your request. Now, for those of you who are currently looking for work and are focused on remote roles, there are ways to make that a priority in your search. Before really applying, try to consider what your ideal work setup would be, what arrangements you would be okay with, and how important a position being remote is to taking a job. What may be your concerns about working remotely? Distraction, isolation, staying productive? Consider positions that may be less of a concern, so maybe researching versus copywriting, or more time spent on the phone versus the computer, or a culture of constant communication versus very little interaction with coworkers. And of course, having remote work experience under your belt is a very valuable asset when looking for a remote position. Some recommendations include, state it clearly. In your experience section, you can mention remote work next to the job title or location. So for example, you can say director of marketing and then in parentheses 100% remote. or high school biology teacher, partially remote work, Anaheim, California, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can also include your experience or skills in descriptions of your past jobs. For example, led a team of 5 customer service reps in a completely remote environment and successfully earned an average team satisfaction rating of 94%. You'll also want to build it into your skills section. For example, make sure you list the types of skills it takes to be a successful remote worker. Time and task management, communication, self-management, the ability to work independently, and comfort with technology are some of the top skills that employers would like to see when hiring for remote jobs. We also want to make sure that you stay safe and avoid work from home scams by looking for work on trusted job boards and specialized remote sites. These are a few of them here listed. And more companies are using or considering hybrid work from home models. Remote work, full-time or part-time, may be something that your employer would be open to or could possibly be a reasonable accommodation. Making sure your search settings are set to remote work can help highlight companies that have a heavy work from home staff. This can often mean a more structured setup, more defined expectations, more organization, and just less guesswork. While jobs are being promoted and advertised as remote, it's still possible to request a work from home setup, even if the position wasn't originally designed that way. If you're exploring a position that's not necessarily remote, make sure not to dive into that question right away, but rather give the interviewer a chance to get to know you and why you would excel in that role, and then broach the topic of remote work to gauge the possibility. And as we've discussed throughout, there are certain nuances to communicating virtually compared to what we need to be mindful of in person. While similar rules apply when interviewing virtually versus in person, there are a few additional considerations. Typically, part of an interview preparation would be timing your travel to your interview to make sure that you're there on time. In this instance, you want to make sure that you are completely ready with your technology so there are no issues with starting on time and connecting successfully. Dressing appropriate continues to be expected. Despite the fact that most likely only your upper body will be on camera, it's a good idea to be dressed head to toe as if it were an in-person interview. In the event that you need to stand up during the call, it can also just help put you in the right mindset. I've heard people, wear full on heels and, dress shoes. Like some people need that tactical sense to really get them in the right mood, and it can help a lot. And finally, remember that this is about presenting a full professional picture. It can be a good idea to use a virtual background, again, like I'm using today, or position yourself in front of a blank wall. That way the interviewer is fully focused on you, the candidate, instead of potentially inferring or assuming things about you based on your home decor. So as we wrap up this afternoon, I want to leave you with some top takeaways. Number one, the pandemic showed us that many roles that were previously required to be done from a physical office can be just as productive as a remote position. Two, organization, communication, and setting boundaries are even more important in a remote role. And three, it's important to have a work plan clearly laid out between you and your supervisor so that you both know what's expected of you, as well as creating accountability and clear deadlines and a communication system so they know what you've accomplished and what still needs to be done. Here are just some additional resources that might be helpful to you. Again, you should have received an email with this deck this morning. If you didn't receive that, feel free to shoot us an email. That is cancerandcareers@cew.org, and we can send over a PDF to you so you have access to all of these resources. And then this is my contact info. If you have any questions that we don't get to today, feel free to shoot me an email. You can also email cancerandcareers@cew.org. We have people checking that all day long, Monday through Friday. And then please follow us on social, where you can find a lot more information on balancing work and cancer. And with that, I will hand it back over to Rachel.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was a fantastic presentation. If we could go to the next slide, thank you. So before we move on to Q&A, a few quick reminders. Here is a list of some upcoming events. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks, and that will be Building Confidence at Work. We hope you can join us for that. We also have our national conference coming up on Friday, June 23rd, which will once again be held on Zoom and open to anyone touched by cancer. You can find out more about all of our upcoming events, including the 8 remaining webinars in this series, on our website, where you can also register for free. And moving along to the next slide again, before we get to Q&A, I'm just going to put these CEU requirements back up there. Again, you're going to receive an email tomorrow with links for the evaluation and post-test. And also flagging that we are gonna do our best to address everyone's questions that are coming into the Q&A box. But if we don't get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to cancerandcareers@cew.org and we will get you an answer. Okay, so on that note, here's Scott again, and let's jump right in. So we have our first question in the Q&A box. Do you have any tips for working remotely while undergoing treatment without people viewing you as just a cancer patient and wrongfully inferring that you may be less effective in your position and or less dedicated to your company?
Yeah, I mean, that's a common concern that we hear a lot here is, what will other people think? Can you still do your job? There's all these kinds of self-doubt questions that go through your mind. But if you're organized, if you have solid communication with your team and your employer, if you set your boundaries clearly and effectively, all those things we were talking about earlier, you can still do your job. And I think probably it's worse in your head than it is for what your coworkers are actually thinking. So, and that's hard to do anything with, because that self-doubt, and I know I've been there, it can be crippling sometimes, but people probably are more worried about your health and making sure that you're safe and doing what you need to do. And as long as your work is still being done and you can still do your job, then I think that's what you just have to focus on.
So really great point, Scott. And definitely there are all kinds of misconceptions that people unfortunately still have about someone who has chosen to work after a diagnosis. It is one of the things that we fight so hard as we go across the community. We also work with employers and do trainings for managers to try to help them understand some of the realities and to break some of these misconceptions. Of course, we can only be so many places at once. And the other thing I would like to add to what Scott just mentioned is that knowing how to communicate effectively can go a very long way in kind of helping to challenge some of these misconceptions as well. And we have a 2-part webinar series that we do on communicating effectively. The offerings from last year are posted on our website. They're archived on our website, so you can actually go straight from here to watch those if you want to. Also sign up to see what we're doing at the end of the year, because we always change them slightly. But being able, you don't say too much about what specifically is happening in terms of misconceptions, but if there are specific comments that are being made to you that make you uncomfortable or are giving you the sense that this is going on, one of the things that I think is really special in those 2 webinars is that we give some examples about how to address comments and how to think about ways that you can professionally acknowledge that you are still able to do your job, you are still doing your work. And So checking those out, and of course, you can also reach out to us if you want to hop on the phone and kind of talk through in more detail some of the problems that you're having. We're happy to give you some tailored guidance to your specific circumstances.
We also have publications for coworkers that you can share, and we have a whole section of our website for being a supportive coworker. You know, it might feel a little awkward if you're hearing comments or something, you're not going to just hand them a brochure, but if your workplace is open and wants to support you, that could be something that you share with them as well.
Absolutely. So, okay, moving along. Okay. So this person has said, my company adopted a flexible work remote policy. Some people are back in the office, but I have stayed remote full time. During calls, I feel like I'm missing out on some of their jokes or relationships. Is there anything I can do to be more connected without risking my health by going into the office?
Yeah, I mean, that feeling of being left out, it can be hurtful, and I completely get that. You know, maybe you find time for, it can even be 10 minutes to say, hey, we haven't touched base in a while. Do you want to hop on the phone and, you know, we can catch up, completely unrelated to work. It's just a social thing. It can either be during the day, if that's something that you guys have time for, or, you know, at a lunchtime, you know, you do a virtual lunch call with people. And again, those regular check-ins are great too, as a way to touch base with everybody, to, you know, catch up on anything that you might have missed in the office. You know, if someone stands up in their cubicle and talks to somebody in the next cubicle over, that happens. I remember that happening every single day when we were still in an office. So, you know, missing out on some of those things, again, those regular check-ins can really be helpful to catch up on whatever you might have missed. But yeah, you know, so communication. And even if it doesn't have to be work related, and sometimes it's even better to just be like, you know, did you watch Yellow Jackets last night? Can you believe what happened?
That's a big one for us guys, if you want to know what happened to CSV.
Although I am behind still, and
you know, it's such good advice, Scott. And I think the other piece of this that I would also encourage the person asking this question to adopt is that, you know, even in workplaces where everyone is exceptionally close, and I say this firsthand because at Cancer and Careers, we're very friendly with each other, and coworkers are always going to have inside jokes with each other that not everyone is in on. And it can certainly be challenging when you're the person who's on the outside of some of the jokes that are going around. But there's a piece of this too that I think is also about knowing that it's probably not malicious that you're not in on the jokes. And it can be awkward and in the moment, you know, maybe if it comes up in a group setting, you know, so someone will have to catch me up on that afterwards. Maybe you actually use that as a bridge to reach out to the person and be like, oh my gosh, can you fill me in on that? It sounds hilarious. And, you know, use that opportunity to have another conversation. But keep in mind that you probably have inside jokes with people that other folks aren't in on. And as Scott was mentioning, there's so many ways to continue to build relationships in this age of technology, even if you're not in the same physical space.
for sure.
Okay, so next question. This person has said, my company was remote for a while in 2020 and 2021, but we have been back full time for most of this past year. In the beginning, it was nice to see everyone and collaborate like we used to, but after a few months, I've noticed that my energy is super low. Am I allowed to request work from home a few days a week to manage?
Yeah, I mean, you can, that's the short answer. The longer answer is, it can't hurt to ask for anything. And especially when it's something that you feel deeply that you need, and something that will help you focus on work and do a better job at work. So I think it's about really thinking through what your needs are, what the ask is, and putting together a proposal that it can either be an email to your boss, it can be notes to yourself, and then getting your boss on a Zoom call or going to their office. But you want to really think out what it is that you're asking for, why it won't interrupt your workflow or why it could be better for your workflow, I think is a really good point to make. And just assuring them that nothing's going to be interrupted on their end, even though this formal policy doesn't exist. Saying, hey, I've been really, feeling low energy, and I think it might be helpful to work from home on Mondays or on Mondays and Fridays, or, whatever your ask is that you want. And I don't think you need to get into specifics if you don't want to about a diagnosis or, all of that is completely your preference. If they know about it already, that of course, might make the conversation shorter. But it's about your comfort level. It's about expressing your needs and making sure that you really want to make like a partnership style approach to it. So it's showing why it's beneficial for you as well as why it'll still be beneficial for the company and your coworkers.
Absolutely. We often say at Cancer and Careers that the only guaranteed no is to the question that doesn't get asked. And so you can certainly ask, and it might be as simple as just saying, I've got some personal stuff going on and it'd be a lot easier for me to manage it if I were able to work from home Monday and Friday. Does that work for you? Right. And then see where they go.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so this question, this person is asking, sometimes when my boss knows I am home, I will get texts at night or on the weekend asking me to sign in. How can I keep my out of office time to myself?
That's hard. And I think Rachel and I have both been there. I think everyone at this who's ever worked a job remotely probably has been there at some point. I think seeing what the ask is and seeing what the priority of it is and how urgent the ask is. If it's something that we have a board meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. and we can't find this information that you were supposed to do, then you're probably going to have to sign in and find that information and help with the board meeting that happens before, it's going to be too early to wake up in the morning and get it for everybody to feel comfortable. If it's something like, where are we on that presentation that's in 3 weeks? I think you can answer by saying like, oh, I'm happy to talk about it tomorrow. Can we set up a meeting? We talk a lot about the swivel here, which can work here. So that's just very briefly is if there's something that you don't want to acknowledge, if there's people asking about your health or people asking things too personally or invading a boundary, I think it can work with like this. You want to acknowledge the question or the ask and then swivel it back to something that's productive or something that you do want to talk about. So let's hypothetically say that Rachel is my boss, which she is.
I actually am. Yeah.
And hypothetically, she texts me at 9 o'clock at night saying, I'm thinking about, our webinar in August. Where are we with that stuff? If I'm sitting at home relaxing, watching Yellow Jackets, I don't want to stop doing that. And I might respond to her and say, oh yeah, I've been thinking about that presentation a lot too. I would love to give you a full update tomorrow. Maybe we can put something on the calendar for 10 a.m. And I think that will acknowledge the request. It will give her some peace of mind that you care and are attentive, but also protecting your personal boundaries of it being 9 o'clock at night. And you don't want to work if you don't necessarily have to right in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also depends on the time of day too. If your employer is texting you at like 10:30 at night, you could just, I think you could just even let that slide and in the morning be like, sorry, I was getting ready for bed, or sorry, I was sleeping, or sorry, whatever was going on regarding my personal life. And then again, acknowledging the importance of it. For the record, I have never texted Scott about anything except Yellow Jackets or something related to some other entertainment thing when he hasn't been working.
Correct. That's why I said
mine as a supervisor.
I want to make it clear that it's hypothetical.
but it is a very real problem, and I don't want to make light of the problem in any way, shape, or form. We know that there's a lot of complexity to it, but I think the bottom line is knowing that usually if a supervisor is reaching out, in my experience when I've been on the receiving end of it, which has not been in a very, very great number of years, it's usually because the employer is having your boss is having their own anxiety about something, and they just kind of want to know that everything is okay. So another way to handle it may also just be to say, like, great flag, and I will definitely check in on you about that tomorrow. And that kind of helps to establish the boundary of, like, I will have this conversation with you after 9 a.m. or whatever your start time is for work, but I will not have it at this moment of the day. And people will usually take their cues from that. And then if it starts being a bigger problem, if you have an HR, this might be the kind of thing that you bring up with HR and whatnot. But often this can be handled with some simple swiveling and gentle acknowledgement of what's going on. Okay, so somehow we seem to have made it to the end of the hour. So I think on that note, I'm going to say my goodbyes to everyone. And Scott, I will leave you to close down the session.
Thank you all for joining. I hope you got some information out of this. Again, if you have any questions that we couldn't get to today, shoot us an email, cancerandcareers@cew.org. We have people checking that throughout the day, Monday through Friday, and we can set up a one-on-one call with you to answer anything that you might need. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks for our next webinar.